I'm a citizen of Europe.
Sono cittadina europea.
Ich bin europäischer Bürger.
Jam Europeană.
Európai polgár vagyok.
Eu sou europeia.
Jag är en medborgare i Europa.
Jag som europeanka.
Yo soy ciudadana del continente europeo.
Jestem Europejczykiem.
Esu Europieter.
Sunt cetățean al Europei.
Ja grażanka Europy.
Ja Romanianka Europy. Esu Europieter.
Moi, je suis un citoyen européen.
Hello, everybody. This is again Ulrike Guérot at European Citizens Radio. We are today on the 28th of September. We are recording another podcast series. And again, we are not doing it live like usual. We do it in Café Aroma because our mission is to give a different aroma to Europe. But no, again, we do it remote because my guest today is Jan Bierhoff. And Jan Bierhoff is sitting in Maastricht. So Maastricht is not an ordinary town. Those of you a little bit more familiar with European affairs know that one of the most famous treaties of the European Union has been signed in Maastricht in 92. And so the town is having a special status in the European world. So Jan, first of all, I will present you later, but hi today to be with us.
Hallo Ulrike. Ja.
So I'm very happy that we do this because today we have also a very specific topic. It's perhaps a topic that most people ignore. It's not sort of sexy in a way, it's not like everybody talks about it. But Jan and I, we do believe that it's a very important topic. And the topic is Europe of the regions. Why do the regions matter for Europe? Why do they matter with their citizens? What do the regions want from Europe? If we say regions, and we will develop this in this podcast, we mean entities like Tyrol or like Böhmen or like Alsace or like Catalonia or Scotland. And now perhaps you have a taste that this might be more actual than some of us think, because we know that there's a strive for independency in Catalonia. We know that there is the same strive for independency in Scotland, to just mention two. But there are other regions which sort of are awakening and which claim their say in the European Union. And this I want to discuss today with Jan. So why did I select Jan? Because Jan, who is a former journalist who has been teaching and studying at Maastricht University, who is today in consultancy business, he's consulting on shifting working spaces to the digital mode, but he also ran a research project. And the research project he basically had under his auspices is a project called Serpentines. Serpentines is a project based on regionalism. There are plenty of Italians and Greek people in this project, and Jan just issued his first working report on the Serpentine project of Europe and the regions. And this is why we are very happy at European Citizens Radio to have him today as our guest. So Jan, the first thing is I would like you to invite to give us some overview about what was your study about, what were the results, and what is also your interest, your goal of research.
Thank you, Ulrike. Well, the ultimate beginning of our research lies in our view on Europe and how we noticed that at this point in time, there's quite a lack of confidence in what Europe is, let alone what Europe should become. And you see that in many instances, you see that also in the polls. We certainly noticed it over here in the Netherlands, where there's a certain drop in confidence in what Europe is and what can Europe achieve for us. And from that point on, we started to explore how exactly that could be, first of all, analyzed, and secondly, how you possibly could turn around that sentiment concerning Europe. And we noticed quite quickly in our research that everything relates to the issue of trust in Europe, and that trust again relates enormously to the environment in which you live, in which you feel you belong to and you want to be part of. Which means that trust in Europe also has a relationship with trust first in your own direct environment. That is there, that has always been there historically, and that seems to be a sort of a constant that we have to relate again to. A lot of the energy in recent decades has been put in centralization of the European effort, and we think that the whole idea of citizens living in particular regions, differing enormously from one another, has been more or less left alone. And for that reason, we try to start a sort of an inventory in what actually those regions now are in this point in time, and to what extent they could become a future building block of the Europe and vision should become part of our lives in, say, 10, 15 years from now. So that's why we focused on regions. And quite early in that process, we left the idea that regions should be identical with the existing administrative entities that you have. So not the provinces or other words you have for that. But we said regions basically are those territorial environments where people feel related to. And then all of a sudden you notice that you are almost instantaneously, you are crossing all sorts of national borders. Regions do not relate to one particular country or another. You see that there is an enormous overlap to various other independent nation states. So regions basically are those environments where people live, where they basically work to a large extent, they feel committed to, and they feel they belong to, and also where they have the feeling they can oversee that particular region. And so.
Okay. Let me just go in because I think it's very important in these days first that when we say Europe these days, we often mean the EU. And there's quite a confusion about what is Europe and what is the EU. And most people, I guess you described it, there's a growing resentment against the EU, its institutions, the basically not so democratic system, lacking participation of citizens. I just want to specify for our listeners that when we easily say Europe, most of the time we mean the institution and the governance of the EU. Just to mention this. And just to pick up on your last point, which is that the nation states borders, and to make this sort of visualizing for our listeners, that go across regions. I mean, just let's name some. There is, for instance, Tyrol, that goes, Austrian-Italian border goes through Tyrol. There is Baskenland, where the Spanish and the French border goes straight to Baskenland. This is what you're mentioning, huh? Okay, so.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's, we saw a number of remarkable things. For instance, you mentioned now Tyrol, and so the whole area, which comprises partly Italian, partly Austrian territory. We were looking into the way, especially in northern Italy, provinces were operating. And then we saw to amazement that the districts that are the formal part of Italy, that they hardly were in the hearts of the people over there, that they had other commitments, and to a large extent also cross-border. And even more so, it is the case in one of the regions we studied, which is also an Italian part, Puglia, so the most southern tip of Italy, that all of a sudden turned out to have a rather weak relationship with the northern, for instance, with cities like Milano or even Rome, and a much more tight connection with overseas countries like Albania and Montenegro.
Okay, let me chime in here. This is very, very interesting. So I would be very happy, perhaps also again to those who listen to us, to the European Citizens Radio. This is a more, let's say academic podcast because we are relating to research now. I would like Jan to give us a little bit more of your research design with which you studied the regions. Basically, what you are telling us is that not the national coherence is dominating, say, for Puglia, because Puglia is less trading or less connected with, say, Milan in the north of Italy, although it's also Italy. Puglia is also Italy, but more connected to Montenegro or to Albania, basically across the sea. Okay.
That's correct, yeah. And it goes back to cultural ties that are being in the process of becoming re-established again. You see a lot of movement, especially in the creative sector now, that more or less now functioning as a sort of a trailblazer for future, also more political contexts. And that's happening there. And we thought that gives a basis for a possibility to strengthen even those ties, although that might take time. And because it takes time, we do not have much time. We choose for the methodology of writing future scenarios. So we envisioned that we put ourselves in a position of 5 years ahead in time and started to look back what in those past 5 years had been established. And then we invented, so it's really a creative work, we invented a lot of activities that had been taking place, initiatives that were taken, and that more or less demonstrated that these very independent regions also can connect and do connect with one another. And that, much to our surprise, when we were presenting those scenarios, people started to recognize it. That is, they really said, well, we see the point. And this
Give us the scenarios. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 scenarios. Just describe us.
We've been setting up 4. 2 of them have been completed. The one I was just describing between the regions of Puglia, Montenegro, and Albania. Interesting because 2 of them are. The second one we have been exploring is the border region between the Netherlands and Belgium, Flanders. So both the collection of 6 Dutch-speaking provinces you could call in the European heartland. The third one we are in the process of setting up now is the exploration of what we called the Celtic connection, so the relationship between Ireland, Northern Ireland, and Scotland, who surprisingly enough, although due to Brexit, also the divisions lines have been drawn, also a sea, the Irish Sea, is in between them. You see a lot of informal connections in the process of being built up right now, because people say we simply don't want those old ties to be completely destroyed. And even we see the point of re-establishing them and reinvigorating them. So that's the one that's presently under investigation. The fourth one we took, border area between Poland and Ukraine, which in former days was called Galicia. Not a Spanish Galicia, but...
under the Habsburg Empire.
Voila, that's it. Yes, yeah. And there again, now certainly under the pressure of the war which is striking there, you see all sorts of old connections being taken up in an incredible speed suddenly. And that's something that is a sort of a basis that can be easily be brought to life. And,
okay. Let me pick up on the Celtic connection, which I find really, really interesting, because what you are seeing here through your research, if I'm not mistaken, is that there is a Celtic connection between Ireland, Northern Ireland, and Scotland. But basically now we are transpassing 2 national borders, because Scotland is still part of the United Kingdom, although they want to go, I heard this from my Scottish friend, they want to go for a second referendum. And obviously there is a national border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, which is Ireland and the United Kingdom. So we are basically having a region which is designing itself in a way beyond national border sort of thinking. That's what you are exploring.
Absolutely. It's it couldn't be more complex, in fact. But still, and I must admit, especially the younger generations are simply ignoring, recent history, you could say. They are taking their own paths, they're making their own connections, and simply do not accept the fact that they should be cut off from one another by further, all sorts of administrative forces that go beyond their life and where they feel they have no control over. And
so you're basically arguing, or you're seeing in your research, that there are cultural basically ties or common memories of history coming back that have now tendency to shape regions, and these regions are basically transpassing the national borders as they do exist. Is that the finding of your... Okay.
Absolutely, yeah. And on top of the fact that they are very complicated sometimes in terms of formal administrative entities, you also see the shapes are quite awkward. And that's the reason why we called those new interregions, we coined the term serpentines for it. There's not a clot. It's a strange line which is crisscrossing throughout the existing nationalities.
Okay, so
listeners might ask why the term serpentine, and this is where it comes from.
This is a very, very good explanation. I go for a sentence into German. Vielleicht haben wir ja auch noch einen deutschen Zuhörer oder eine deutsche Zuhörerin, die sich diesen Podcast anhört, obwohl er auf Englisch ist. Englisch ist ja die Lingua Franca in Europa, was uns ermöglicht, Jan und mir jetzt in diesem Fall miteinander zu sprechen. Aber ich hoffe, wir können euch ein bisschen triggern, ein bisschen anteasern für die Bedeutung der Regionen in Europa und für die kulturelle Vielfalt von Regionen, die sich jetzt neu sortieren. And having said that, with this coming back to your fourth methodology, Poland and Ukraine, this is also intriguing me, because when you said Galicia and you see basically this war, unfortunately Europe is in this tragic war, Russian-Ukrainian war, and we see in this war, in a way, when we go back to history, that there are, say, three parts of Ukraine. There's Crimea, which was always sort of, where does it belong to? Then there is the Donbas with this referenda and actually the battle point for territories. And then there is the Western Ukraine. And we see these three entities modeled basically in history, with each and every having a different past in a way. How do you judge this from your research?
Yeah, well, it gives us the impression, which is still rather provisional, I must say, but nevertheless, in this stage it gives us the opportunity to look upon Europe with different eyes, and that we can easily drift away from the more nationalistic approach, which has been the basis of the European Union, the collection of member states. And when you take regions as a sort of a first building block of a new Europe, then again, all those national borders do not necessarily have to be the beginning and the end of completion. Then it gives also, I think, the political world the opportunity to come up with new solutions which haven't been brought up so far.
Okay, so that is a very important sentence that you have just been saying, which is that the national borders does not need to be the end of, say, thinking when it comes also to structure the political model of a future or different or alternative Europe. So I think we can agree on the fact that the European Union, as it stays today, was basically built on the cooperation of member states, of 27, as of today, 27 member states, which we call nation states, right? But exactly. What your research is now suggesting is that we see different entities, and that these different entities have cultural features, that they are cross-national borders, but that these entities have a strong identity, resilience, and they want also to have their place in shaping a different Europe. Can you perhaps explain to us whether in your research you modeled a little bit how the regions could be stronger participants in the, say, European governance picture?
Yeah, certainly. We have given that some thought. I think it will begin with a higher ambition level on the part of the regions themselves. They so far they have very few political ambitions for the regions and certainly for the interregions. What you now see is that are forms of collaboration, cross-border collaboration, but almost all of these contacts are steered by a European program called Interreg, which provides funds, but only for particular projects, and also the themes for which people can put in their proposals are centrally defined. So regions have little to say and are hardly a political position of any significance as of now. And they, first of all, should develop the ambition to acquire that political position. And the scenario that we see for within our project is that at some point when that starts to happen, these regions could have their own regional representative in, for instance, European Parliament. And that could happen via the methodology of a dual vote. That on the one hand, citizens will be able to vote on a party of their volition, but also elect in a representative of that interregion. So that not only ideologies or ideas are represented, but also regional interests, which so far is hardly happening. And
I just wanted to add that this is, very, very interesting research. And I think there's really a meta trend towards regional identity, also a meta trend towards citizens' identity. You know, people today say, I'm from London, I'm from Barcelona, I'm from Berlin. And I just want to point our listener, if you are now triggered by what we're discussing here, the new role of the regions in Europe, don't forget that we can also be funded or gifted. We are the European Democracy Lab. We are running this radio, the European Citizens Radio. And if you like what we are doing, then perhaps you can give us €1 or 2. So please visit our website, which is www.eudemlab.eu. But let's continue, because I think, Jan, you and the Serpentines project, you're not the only ones digging into that regional thing. I know, for instance, that University of Lausanne has a huge research cluster, and that research cluster is called the Rise of the Subs. So the subs are the sub-entities of nation states, precisely like Alsace, Tyrol, Catalonia, and they called it the Rise of the Subs. So they are uprising. The second indication I would just give into this discussion here is that very recently in France, there was a new legislation, and the legislation is now allowing regional languages at French schools in the elementary school, like Alsacien, Breton, and so, which for long was basically not happening because l'École républicaine was, the French Republican school. So we see a second tendency also in this regionalization of languages. And I was in Rennes, which is very northern France and the capital of Bretagne. And it's very interesting that they have at the train station, there is a sortie, like exit, where you go out, but it's also written in Gaelic. So Gaelic language is also coming back. And I had when I was still professor at University of Krems, Danube University of Krems, I had a research project which was called Regiopal, regiopal.eu. So we analyzed the position of the regional parliaments in the governance system, the multi-layer governance system of the European Union. And it was very interesting because we did fact-finding research. We went, for instance, to Castilla, and we asked in a regional parliament, what would you like to do? And then the regional parliamentarians, most of them, we also went to the Bavarian Landtag, for instance, or to Eastern Belgium, into the East Belgium representation. And every regional parliamentarian would tell us, look, we would like to talk to Brussels directly. We do not want to talk to, the Castilians said, we do not want to talk to civil servants in Madrid because they haven't any idea about what we want and what we need to do. So let us talk to Brussels direct. We love Europe, but we need not to go via our capital to have a say in Europe. So can you comment on this?
Yeah, certainly. I think that's first of all, I think it's a sign of times that not only we as a small group of committed Europeans, scholars who are interested in European affairs, are doing this research, but it's taking place in other places across Europe as well. And at some point, I hope these research efforts can be brought together and should be canalized into one bigger project that can also have a larger impact. On the other hand, what you now are noticing is that regions want to have a direct representative and want to be heard directly in the European capitals. That's a general sign. We find that in all the 4 regions we have under investigation. And that's only logical, because so far, it has been very difficult to make clear what the real interests are, real concerns are in a particular region, when they are filtered through national organizations or administrations that have to juggle with 10, 15 conflicting interests sometimes, and then the outcome can be very haphazard. You simply don't know if you will be heard at all ever. Huh?
And it's also physical because, I'm German. And I know, for instance, that the representation of the Federal Republic of Germany in Brussels is, as a building, is not as nice as, for instance, is the representation of North Rhine-Westphalia or the Bavarian representation in Brussels. These buildings tend to be sort of at least as big as is the representation of the Federal Republic. So there you can see in architecture that the regions have ambitions. Huh?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. What we could imagine is that at some point when this process starts and these interregions do want to develop political ambitions and they want to go along the lines we were just discussing, that we could end up as a Europe consisting of, say, 40, 50, 60 of these larger regions that, when you are overlooking that total, compared to one another, are much more equal than the situation with the present member states, where you have microstates and 2 or 3 major
Malta,
dominant states.
Luxembourg. Yeah. You have Malta
Voilà.
and Luxembourg with 300,000 citizens, and then big Germany, 80 million. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Look, you're not astonishing me, because that's precisely, in a way, if I can say this at this point, what I wrote already in my book, Why Europe Should Become a Republic, a Political Utopia in 2016. And in this book, I sketched out that the regions are the anchor of people, for identity and culture. The real, even in Germany, most people are saying, I'm from Bavaria, I'm from Saxonia, I'm from whatever, Rhineland. And that's the same in all other member states. The people from Apulia are not the ones of Milano or Lombardy. And in France, people from Corsica are not Bretons, and so on and so forth. So this was just the idea that perhaps also medieval cards, medieval maps of Europe show us that before we sort of invented the nation state after the French Revolution, Europe was basically built by regions, and the regions by then were kingdoms like Königreich von Burgund, There is a return of history in this movement. Would you say so?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. It's a sort of a tidal wave that we, for historical reasons, we have ended up in 2 or 3 ages where the getting together element was dominant. So the creation of nation states, and that has worked to some extent. But we're coming to the end of that line, more or less.
Okay. But then let's be very precise. If we are coming to the end of the line, have in your research project envisaged how a representation, say a regional representation within the a new Europe, let's not call it European Union, let's call it whatever, different Europe, how this could work in polity terms, but also what do you make with the existing Council of the Regions? Because there is a regional entity in the current system of the EU which has advisory function for now.
Exactly. Yeah, but that's the situation. It's exactly the problem, I think, that they only have an advisory role here. I think what we heard from quite a number of people we interviewed in the interregions we investigated is that, they have the feeling that in the Committee of the Regions, that's a place where you go to have your share of the available monies for European projects, and then you take it with you. You take it. You try to compete, especially with the other regions. We were there for the same budget, and that it basically is the bulk of the activities, and that it is much more an institution that keeps the regions apart, other than it gives the opportunity to unite and to operate as joint regions. So I don't foresee a huge future for that entity, to be honest. What could happen is what you could foresee, that in one scenario it was mentioned in our case, that the Committee of the Regions should have a character change. Now it's an advisory body that will not be necessary any longer when all those regions have direct representation. For instance, in the European Parliament, they can take care of their own interests directly in one of the institutions, the main institution. That committee could transfer into a sort of a clearinghouse for European togetherness, for working together and making all forms of connections, because they certainly do have an amount of expertise and data that could be put to use for those regions who want to further develop or want to be inspired by projects which have been taking place in other regions, for instance.
Let's be a little bit more precise, perhaps also for our listeners, because when we talk regions, I guess you and your research, when you are mentioning, for instance, the Celtic region, or you're mentioning Puglia and Montenegro, you're not talking abstract terms. You are talking real people, real commerce, real interest to interact cross-border, but also facilities. I mean, I was recently in Strasbourg, and then crossed the border, the Franco-German border, to be in Kehl for a little presentation. The people of the regions, their problem, what is this? It's public transportation. You are on one side of the national border and on the other side of the national border. Who runs the national transportation? I mean, the public transportation sort of thing. The next thing is schools. If you happen to be on a border and the next school is across the border, can you place your kid into the school across the border? The third thing is just hospitals. I heard, I also questioned people, and they would say, if you have an accident and you need to be very quickly to an hospital, and the nearest hospital is across the Franco-German border, so you would end up in a French hospital. Today, you are brought to a German hospital kilometers away, because it's not possible to place a German citizen like this in a French hospital. So the people who are living in these regions, have real sort of day-to-day problems. And did you look at this also in your research project?
To some extent, because then you really have to go seriously into detail. But I've encountered it over here in my own region. The city of Maastricht has borders to Germany and to the two regions of Belgium, the French-speaking and the Flemish-speaking one. And you have exactly the same problems here. But what we notice here, that also a beginning of the solution is more or less developed here, and which means that you simply start to ignore the differences. There are all sorts of legal obstacles to make it possible that you easily cross borders for all these elements that you mentioned, schooling, hospitals, and so on. For hospitals over here, it's no problem any longer. They have mutual agreements to take each other's patients, and even so the social security agencies have accepted that in the meantime. They pay each other's bills across the cross border, and even
that's good. That's good.
Certainly.
And may I add, it's good because this is precisely a request of European citizens. Because I guess you know that we had this conference on the future of the European Union, in which the citizens were asked what Europe do they want, and there are 49 conclusions. And among the 49 conclusions, what European citizens want most is equal treatment and equal access across national borders. So it just corresponds to what citizens want. Continue.
Yeah. And again, also here, I think the more or less the tendency is not to focus any longer on harmonization of regulation, because that's simply too complex and basically has to go via national governments who are simply unwilling to comply, but try to be creative, find your own regional solutions. Another interesting example over here, also in my region, we also border with Germany, as you know. For instance, just across the border, there recently has been a building project for a number of people who are working on both sides of the border. At some point, it had to be decided, because there were the Dutch who wanted to live in Germany, under which regulation those houses should be built. And then the German authorities decided that they would give over completely to the Dutch to oversee the building process. This is unique, unique.
This is unique that the Germans consider that others can do it. It's just really a unique decision.
Yeah, they had to swallow quite a bit, but it worked, and they were happy. And
super example.
It functions now as a model that you can achieve a lot of things if
you just have trust. If you just have trust,
if you have trust,
that the others can do it, right?
Precisely,
yeah.
Okay. I come back to my first words in this interview we're having. Trust is everything. And that you can establish mutual trust in a context that is regional and overseeable.
And that the own regulation is not necessarily any better than the regulation of the other side of the corner, and that you can just give it to the hands of others. Yeah. So now, tell us, where will the Serpentine report go? Because if you have so many nice findings which are interesting for politics, will you do PR around it? Will you spread the word?
We certainly will. We try to do so. But more importantly, we are hoping that we also have been able to inspire scholars across Europe to take up this issue, because a lot still needs to be worked out, further investigated, developed. We also hope that some of the conceptualization of these issues will also be taken further. And we now notice we're going public to some extent, that there have been others thinking about these issues, are working on it. And a combination of these forces, I think, now should be very important. And especially, I think, universities should take up the gauntlet here, because we are now a group of 5 individual committed Europeans, all scholars, but nevertheless working on an individual basis. And I think the whole idea of Europe and a regionally structured Europe deserves also further academic attention. And hopefully we will be able to boost a form of network that will continue along the lines we've been setting.
Okay, but if I'm not mistaken, your project was part of the overall project Citizens Take Over Europe. I just want to point listeners to this project. So this is www.citizenstakeover.eu, which is a network of European activists of all sorts, and they are gathering in the internet since 2 or 3 years, every Wednesday, basically having a citizens' assembly, working on projects, but already working on a template for a European constitution. So there is this huge bottom-up Citizens Take Over Europe network. And if I'm not mistaken, the Serpentines project was part of this network, right?
Yeah. They adopted it and thought it was a very fruitful line of thought that needed to be advocated and also publicized. So they happily took us on board. Nevertheless, there's a lot of work ahead for this project. And the University of Salento in Brindisi, so in the south of Italy, has now decided to start a lookout for other academic counterparts to create a serious European network to have a long-term investigation into this issue, and hopefully they will be able to pull it off.
This is really, really interesting news. So you have University of Brindisi getting in. Look, if you have a project or a working document like a PDF or something, I would be very happy to put this on the website of the European Democracy Lab, because that's exactly what we are working on. So I'm very happy to spread the word and to put it on our website and to help distributing the findings. So just send me the text. And the Celtic people, do they now have a university where the project could be attached to, like Edinburgh or something?
Yeah, it's Dublin. No. In this case, it's University of Dublin, where they have, mind you, an institution called the Brexit Institute.
Brexit Institute.
Where they closely follow all the developments also in the UK in respect to the follow-up of what has been decided and how the dynamics in the UK are developing, and they are quite interesting, as you know. So
it's very interesting that we have, as you mentioned in the beginning, we come to the end of this talk, but I was just like to recall when you started describing your project and the importance of the regions, you said that we are in difficult European discussions everywhere in the European Union. Everybody is talking Dexit, Frexit, Italexit. Everybody wants to leave the EU, so there is there's a huge resentment against the EU. But it's interesting that when I talk to my British friends, they actually are starting discussions about how to come back to Europe. So it's a very interesting sort of counter-cyclical thing, because the people in Brittany, in Great Britain, the United Kingdom, they are realizing actually what it means actually to lose Europe. I mean, to lose it in all aspects. So perhaps we can learn from them that we should not exit in the first place.
I've been traveling there for decades to the UK, and it was quite clear that at some point this was bound to happen. If you have been reading the yellow press over there in England, they have been so harsh on the EU, for decades, and then really they have been masterminding many of the British, and so at some point it was bound to happen. But maybe that's also a thing, going out. There's also. I think there should be a way back, and also one of the flexibilities of the union should be that they allow for these movements. They are inevitable, and at some point you can hope they lead to a better situation.
I think it's we need to close now because we are basically running out of our 45 minutes of this radio. But to finish on this, it's probably not the United Kingdom that may come back or join the European Union again, but it might be Scotland or Wales.
Oh, yes.
That is joining a different Europe and the different modus of participation of the regions. I guess that is what you are basically shaping in your project, and that is what many people are working on these days. So with this, I would like to thank you very much, Jan, for giving us an in-depth description of the role and the importance of regions, how regions could be building a different kind of Europe in which people have their regional identity but still are working on a European continent together. I'm very interested in reading your report. I'm very happy again to place it on our website. So thank you for this little interview. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
This podcast is only possible because of you. The countless viewers and listeners support our work through donations. If you would also like to contribute to the success of this project, please click on the corresponding button on our website www.europeandemocracylab.org. Thank you.
Ja sam Evropljanka.
Yo soy ciudadana del continente europeo.
Jestem Europejczykiem.
Esu Europietem.
Sunt cetățean al Europei.
Ja građanka Европы.
Ja громадянка Європи.
Esu Europietem.
Moi, je suis un citoyen européen.